Last year, 24th of Jan, 2022, we found ourselves boarding the MSC Orchestra. It's quite a magnificent cruise liner. But you see, this kind of cruise was a different cruise. Actually, usually the orchestra, they go to places like the Greek islands, Eastern and Portugal, Venice. Oops. Technical in Venice, and this is where we went. Somewhere between South Africa and the South Pole, to an island called Marion Island. And usually on these cruises, people dress up something like this. And this is how we dressed up. All 2,000 passengers. Sorry, this is how we dressed up. This is what we usually do. This is what they usually do on cruises. And this is what we did. Let me use this. Let me just use my keyboard. This is what we did. All 2,000 passengers off the ship. The crew said it was one of the weirdest experiences they had. The clubs were empty, the bars were empty, the casinos were empty. People woke up before sunrise to go stand on the deck and went back after sunset. And the biggest irony was that the only land we saw was about 32 knots away, and it disappeared as quickly as we saw it into the mist. Some people didn't even see it. But it was one of the best experiences of both our lives. It was truly a life-changing experience. So the glaring question is, why on earth would someone do something like that?
Well, to be honest, that's also a question that I asked myself. Why would anyone go so far into the middle of nowhere, spend so much money on a cruise to just look at birds? Who are these idiots that would do such a thing? Well, I ended up being one of those idiots. And as Ebbie said, it was a life-changing experience. So I'm truly grateful for it. It was really one of the most inspiring things I've ever done. And talking about inspiring things, allow me to tell you about a bird. Now, this is not your average bird. You see, the average bird has a wingspan of about 20 to 40 centimeters. This bird has a wingspan of up to 3.5 meters. It is called the wandering albatross. Peter Harrison, he's an explorer and biologist. He says that these birds are the monarchs of the sea. You see, their castles aren't made of stone and rock. Instead, they have castles made out of the vastness of the ocean. Their thrones are made out of the wind. The wandering albatross lives on the windiest, stormiest, coldest ocean in the world, called the Southern Ocean. Now, I want you to imagine that you are a baby albatross. You've been hacking away at the edge of your eggshell for the last 7 days. And once you break out of this egg that you've been in for 70 days, now that's the longest incubation period of any bird species known to man. Once you break out, you then start your sitting career. You see, you will be sitting on this island for the next 270 days. Now, talk about lockdown. Our lockdown was between, 60 to 90 days. This poor bird is locked down on this island for 270 days. Here, you wait for your parents to come feed you. They take turns. They come between 9 and 14 days, every 9 and 14 days. So sometimes you only get food once every 2 weeks. And then if you, by some miracle, you survive this the southern winter, and for 270 days, your parents just one day stop showing up. You become hungry, you lose weight, and you realize that it's either fly or die. So you gather up all the courage you can, wait for this particularly windy day, run full speed to the closest cliff, close your eyes, and you jump. When you open your eyes, you are flying. You fly and you fly and you fly. You very quickly master aerodynamics. You become so sensitive to the smallest air currents coming off the ocean that you can do what we call dynamic flight, which means you almost never flap your wings. You fly about 500 kilometers per day, which equates to 180,000 kilometers a year, or 10 million kilometers in your lifespan of 60 to 70 years. 10 million kilometers is more than 14 times from the Earth to the moon and back. Why do you fly? Well, you fly in search of food, mostly squid. When you see squid, you use your feet as brakes in the water to slow you down and to create that drag, and you have your squid, and then you fly off in search of more squid. You continue this process for the first 8 to 12 years of your life without setting a foot on solid ground. The ocean is truly your home. You see, yeah, you do everything that you need to do on the ocean, flying 500 kilometers a day in search of food. And then one day, something primal calls you. Your hormones tell you that it's time to return to the island where you came from. By some miracle, you find this remote island in the middle of the Southern Ocean, and then you realize you have a problem. You see, until now, you've always used your feet as brakes in water, and now you have to use them as landing gear on solid ground after 8 to 12 years of not touching solid ground. So again, you have to muster all your courage and you commit. And to be quite frank, the biologists say that any landing, the first landing of a wandering albatross is quite a disaster. They normally thump down on the ground, or they make and just imagine this 3.5 meter wingspan creature that when he hits the ground does a few somersaults until it grinds to a halt. They say that any landing that a wandering albatross is able to walk away from is a good one. So after you gather yourself, you join other wandering albatrosses in beautiful mating dances, and thus starts a cycle for the next generation of wandering albatrosses.
So halfway throughout the trip, the intercom came on and the captain said we are getting close to Marin Island. So very excitingly, all 2,000 passengers of the ship all ran to the front of the ship, waiting to see or going to see this island. But everyone, when we went out there, found ourselves in windy, misty, ice-cold weather, staring into nothingness.
So how did we end up here on the ship? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back about 220 Skype calls, 45,000 lines of code, and days in and out, and weeks, which turned into months, which turned into years of illustrating birds. Anton Prier, a friend, avid birder and photographer, asked my brother and I, Ebbie, and myself, whether we would want to build this app with him. So what we needed to do is to pitch to Fancy Peacock. Fancy is one of South Africa's most well-known, well-respected and well-loved ornithologists and birders. He's written more than 5 books. His most well-known books are his kids book and his LBJ book for the more advanced birder. After doing the pitch, we waited, and then Fancy said yes by sending us this multi-page PDF full of ideas of what this app can be and where it can go. When we, in the beginning, Ebbie, myself, Anton, and Fancy said that the way that we want to work together, we laid down a few fundamentals, and those fundamentals are sustainability and quality with mastery.
Yeah, so the first thing that we decided on was the way we work should be sustainable. And sustainability to us means sustainable finances, sustainable relationship, and a sustainable personal drive. So before DVT, since our first startup attempt, we lost about 1 million rand. So we decided to bootstrap this one, only investing time and little to no money. We both have full-time jobs, so that means we can only work after hours, but we also have families of 5. But we intentionally limited the impact on our families. We also needed to maintain the trust within the team, as Fancy works from somewhere from the Cape. So we set up Skype calls at least once a week for an hour long, and that happened like for the past 4 years now already.
And that's the 220 Skype calls, and working with these highly skilled people, each an expert in their field. It's really sustainable for me because it gives me the motivation to want to bring my best to the table.
So like working on this app doesn't mean if I'm just fixing a bug, working on a feature, having a chat with the team, I'm energized after that. And that positive energy was also a good sign that we are in a sustainable path. But it's also interesting how this whole thing positively impacted my day job. I felt confident about my abilities, like I could explore anything from UX, not limited with the times and budgets from corporates. I've also felt hopeful in humanity, like working with these great people is really exciting and they bring out the best in you. And it's also kind of bringing back the fun back in product development.
So I learned that a product can serve one of 3 markets. Firstly is the most technological and gadget market. So that's the gadget people. The second market is the price market. So you have to go as low as possible and then you'll be able to sell. The third market is the quality market. For us, we chose quality, but in a sense, it was chosen for us. You see, all 4 of us love working on high quality products and working with high quality products. An example of the decisions that we made towards this trade-off was that we decided that Fancy would redraw all the birds for the app, even though he already had most of the birds drawn for his kids book. So you can see, if I bring out my best skills, it would probably not even come close to the first picture. Fancy, the birds that he drew for the bird book was in the quality of the second bird on the screen. And the third bird with the high detail is the quality that he took to the illustrations for the app. Other decisions that we made for quality against price or gadgetry was that we decided not to put a lot of features within the app. We would rather have fewer features, make sure that those features are truly meeting the needs of our users. Take our time with iterating on that specific feature until it reaches a point where it's really meeting the need.
So quality is not just in art, but also in the perception. So for us, it meant when we created the logo, it meant hundreds of iterations, options from all the scope. It meant a lot of user feedback. So we sent this out to users to give us some feedback. And eventually we ended up with a list with pros and cons, and finally deciding on one after like a few months. But also working with this team, I want to give kind of an example or a metaphor. It's like walking on a tightrope. Everyone acts as a limb necessary to balance the body. In some sense, that trust is terrifying, but in other sense, it's liberating and enabling you to practice your craft wholeheartedly, like bring out the best of you in a confident way. So just to add on that, like everyone is an expert in their field. Francis with his illustrations, Stephan with his technical knowledge and organizational leadership, myself with UX. Anytime we want to think of this team without one, we kind of lose hope.
One area where we knew we had to take a quality approach was in the content of the app. Those illustrations that I spoke about earlier, that Fancy redid for the app, these illustrations get put on what we call plates. So the image that you see in front of you is two different plates, different birds. So as you can see, the birds are poised in a position that you would probably see them in the wild. There's also an illustration of the habitat in which you would probably find them. And then, very importantly, they're poised in such a position where it's easy to see the most important identification information. There's also behavioral illustrations. The image on the left, you can see the hawk, how it dives down. And then there's a lot of information almost hidden in plain sight. So there's a lot of text here, but it doesn't feel like that because the text is very contextual, very contextually and specific to what you are seeing. So it doesn't feel like you're going through a lot of content. It feels more like you are exploring the image, and the text is there to assist with that exploration. Then also, do you remember? So we're talking about the content, the names of the birds and the naming and the grouping within the families and where to put the families. This is super important because that's how people would find the bird in the app. This is actually, it turns out to be quite complicated. You see, it's not just the initial layout. These bird species get lumped together at times, get split between different species. As we learn more about the species, where they are, and how they behave. But luckily, all of this scientific information, we have an expert in Fancy that handles all of that for us. Each bird then also has a hand-drawn distribution map, and the bars at the bottom show us when in the year you can expect to see them and when their breeding cycles are. Then the birds also have a collection of sound recordings. It's a collection because it's multiple sound recordings that we edit together. This is to make sure that there's as wide as possible variety of the sounds that the birds make. The image that you're seeing in front of you here is a sonogram. It is a visual representation of the sound that you would be hearing. And you can also see that there's annotations on the sound. These annotations are there to give extra context and also some extra fun. There's quite a few funny comments throughout the app hidden between all the images. These two maps show where we've gathered these sounds from. Two things should be apparent is that it was quite a project. So on the left-hand side is the Southern African map. The right-hand side is the global map. The other thing that should be apparent is the amount of names on the screen. So it wasn't just done by one or two people. It's really a community of people that have contributed to the content of the app. This specifically is for the sounds, but the same goes for the photos. And we also even have community members that randomly heard our call and helped us out with some devices to test the app on. The images, the photos for the birds, each bird has about 6 high quality curated photos on average. So, yeah. And then these photos are also annotated, many of them, to help with the identification information.
So here's an interesting fact for you all. Southern Africa is about 10% of the world's 10,000 species. So imagine doing all of that above for 1,000 species. Just to give you like a sum of everything, that means we have to create 1,000 thumbnails, 1,000 customized illustration plates, 1,000 maps, 1,000 bars, about 700 recordings and counting, and more than 6,000 photos, and about 20% of them annotated. And yes, you get, that thing about do not listen for your users or listen for your users. So we had a lot of Shazam requests, like identifying a bird using the bird sound, and we just give you the answer. But what's the fun in just getting the answer? Like, we're going through all of this effort to make the learning experience fun and simple. But to do that at any given moment in time, you need accessible but super accurate information in one of those 1,000 species. So initially designing the layouts of like the app itself, I needed to put down like the dimensions, but making a mistake here could cost us weeks of rework and made me super nervous making these decisions.
And talking about the rework, we had some rework, we had some challenges. One of the most notable was the cropping of the images or the photos. So in the beginning, we had all the photos as squares so that doesn't matter the orientation of your device, you can still have the same, like the same that Instagram has. We quickly realized that, well, not quick enough, but we realized that aspect ratio is not going to work for birds. So that meant that we had to re-edit all the photos in the app. Another challenge, and this is something I think quite unique to our app, from apps that I've worked on before, but was the storage space issue. You see, because you have to have all the information ready at hand when you are either in the bush or in the forest or on the sea or in the desert, where there might not be any internet connection, we have to have all the assets on the phone. We had to learn about what they call asset packs in Android, because in the beginning, what we tried to optimize for was we thought of you as the user and how much space you might have on your phone and limit the size. But what we realized is that the stores already cater for that. They make sure that the apps aren't too big. So that's why we had to learn all these techniques of how to distribute the assets. And especially Android gave us a hard time figuring that out. Because it's such a unique problem. It's also not very well documented, and it's more documented for the game space than for normal apps. The other problem that we had with the storage and all these assets was our Git repositories. They grew really, really large. We had, at one point, we had Git repos of about 7 gigs. We had problems cloning them onto our devices. And then we said, okay, no, enough is enough. We need to find a way. So that's when we had to do open heart surgery on our Git repos, get rid of all the assets in the whole history of Git, of our repositories, without messing up the rest of the history. And then we had to learn about something they call Git large file storage and how to use that. And that works much better as it's intended for these large files.
Yeah, so as you can hear, there was a lot of technical learnings that happened throughout this course. But something else that we need to learn was the product itself. So it's quite funny, but the stuff that Fancy and Anton brought to the table initially, the ideas, was the stuff that we ended up launching with. But just to learn and have everyone a shared understanding, there was a few events that we all had to go through together. So to meet everyone where they are, for all the UX guys out there, I followed a reverse engineered hypothesis-driven design approach, which is kind of the flip side on this. So let me just, if I can see if I have the mouse. Okay, never mind, leave the mouse. So on the left, you will see this is the normal hypothesis table. So you would start with the business outcomes. Then from the business outcomes, you would say who the users are that you want to target with these outcomes. And then what are the specific needs for these personas? And then what is the feature that's going to drive out these business outcomes? But when I reversed it, I said, okay, let's just all throw out all the feature ideas that we have. And then from there on, we figure out, okay, what type of needs are we trying to solve with these features? And then from now we have a set of needs and say, about who's the users that have these needs? Like, are they intermediate birders, beginner birders, or like, what are they? Are they actually birders? And then at the end, we say, okay, well, if we do all of these things with this feature, how are we driving our business outcomes forward? What are our business outcomes? Are we just trying to acquire people? Are we trying to retain people? Are we trying to monetize people into all these features? What else? What is the business outcomes? So this is kind of the example that we, and how it kind of looked like eventually. So again, from all of that, we were able to set out all of these persona types as well. But you can see this was just a collaboration session, and there was a lot of assumptions that we needed to make. But ultimately, we ended up with a few hypotheses that we could test. And specifically, we went through this impact and effort diagram to kind of what hypothesis is the one that is worth validating. And if we validated this hypothesis, then the whole effort is worth going into. So, but anyway, eventually we had all of these hypotheses. Now we just need some users to test. So we found ourselves here at the bird fair. So it's like a conference, but for birders. And here we just chatted to a few people. We asked them to fill in some questionnaires. But all of this data just put us on the same table regarding the personas, needs, and priorities. But most importantly, this event validated and we understood a market fit. But this wasn't enough for us to truly understand how features should be built and what the problem is we're trying to solve. We had a saying that if this app won't turn us into birders, then we haven't done a good job. So we had to become birders. We had to become the end user of our product. And that's ultimately how we ended up on the ship Marion. We wanted to understand what about birding makes it so enjoyable? What part of the app plays inside of this experience? But ultimately, we formed part of the community. We shared the same experiences. We used our own app. And the coolest thing is we were stuck with our users for a whole week. It's like user research heaven. And the best part is we came out as birders.
At some point, we found ourselves observing the people more than we were observing the birds.
But it wasn't just this learning experience that was so valuable, but the humbling experience of seeing people interact joyfully with a product is priceless. So the app took a few facelifts. You can see in the beginning, way in the beginning of about 3 years back, it started up something like that. And then eventually it turned into a more simple thing where we said, well, France's illustrations is so well an expert that we wanted to focus on the content. And you can see how it simplifies over the time. And at the end, after we've decided on our logo and our branding, it kind of fits in there. And I used Figma and the design library just to migrate all of that, all the learnings I learned in my day job. I expert in the side project, and then I bring it back to the client. But eventually, this is how we ended up with the app.
So talking about the tech stack, if there are any questions about the tech stack, please feel free to also put the questions in the chat. We can deep dive into that anytime. So for design and collaboration, you've seen all the Miro boards and Figma boards that Eddie showed, and we used Figma and Miro. And then for our data architecture, we have this massive Google sheet where Fancy and Anton puts in all the scientifically accurate data for the birds. This we manually export and then import into SQLite databases that we then deploy with the apps. Just a note on why we chose SQLite is it was very easy to just copy and paste from iOS to Android as we are building natively. So iOS we built with Swift. Kotlin, with Android, we use Kotlin. And also why we chose Swift and Kotlin specifically, Objective-C and Java, there's quite a big jump between the two, where with Swift and Kotlin, the syntax and the language features are much closer to each other. There's even some videos where people show that you can very much have the same architecture. Not outside the frameworks, but within the language space. Then in terms of user-specific data, we use Firebase and specifically Firestore. The main reason for that is the online and offline capability that Firestore gives us. If you are outside in the woods somewhere and you record your sightings, then we wanted to make it as simple as possible and easy to maintain for this small team of 2 developers. And Firestore just is really amazing when it comes to that. And at this point, I can say we have quite a lot of downloads, and we still are yet to pay anything to Firestore. So it's a very cheap way to get an app like this going. We also use Firebase's authentication, Crashlytics for any crashes and logs on that. We also use its analytics, and then the functions is our back end. So it's a true serverless architecture, and then performance management and also notifications. We send ourselves the data. So if there's someone new that subscribes or something crashes, we get that in our Slack channels and manage it from there. For our website, we chose to use a tool called Bubble, which is a no-code tool. And we also used the same tool for our management portal that we might show to you, if there are people that's interested. This management portal is where Fancy writes all his articles that we then post to the apps, and that's accessed from the apps. This, of course, is not available offline, where the rest of the content is. Then for our payment architecture, we use a tool called RevenueCat. So RevenueCat makes it very easy to manage subscriptions across platforms. You still have to set up your subscription specifically in the different stores, but here we can activate some of these subscriptions very easily, deactivate ones. If we're running a promotion like we are at the moment, we can set it up there, and then we can quickly take it down if we realize this is not going where we want it to go. And it also gives us good metrics, analytics on that. And then through that, using Firestore's functions, we have webhooks on the different stages of our users. So if someone just downloads the app and subscribes, and then at a later stage, they might cancel, we can then send them an automated email through MailChimp that says, hey, if you cancel now, just remember you're losing out on all these cool functions.
Yeah, and maybe just to close off my piece for building an app like this, I would say for any moment given time, if this is not sustainable, then it won't work. So I want to give you just some takeaways. The one thing is take it extremely serious, but have fun doing it. Become the end user of your product. Become so curious about how people interact in a problem space. And then most importantly, keep it sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I say sustainable finances, sustainable relationship, both client and your personal life and your family, and have a personal drive, that motivation that keeps on coming.
Just a short story on how I became a user of our own app and how my curiosity got inspired. As a new birder, Fancy said that what's a good idea is just to browse through the information on the app. So just spend time just reading. Don't try to remember everything. It's just quite overwhelming with 1,000 birds. So just read, and if there's something that interests you, then dive deeper. And that's exactly what I did. So I'm going to try a little demo of this on the simulator. Okay, so I hope you all can see. And I came across the black barbet on the app, and you can see that there was this small note that said, did you know the familiar call of this barbet is actually an impeccably timed duet between the sexes? I didn't completely understand what that meant, so I went and looked at the sound, and this is what I got. You can see here, I hope everybody heard. No feedback, so I hope you heard that. You can see here, it says, then a duet, so perfectly timed that it sounds like a single bird. One bird calls to the other one, puddle. So it sounds like, okay, great, thanks. Sounds like two puddle, two puddle, two puddle. So that two. I immediately recognized the sound because it's something that I've heard quite a lot in Pretoria. And armed with this information in the back of my head, I went jogging the one day in the streets of Pretoria, and I heard the sound. And I was like, I need to see this in real life. And when I got around the corner, there they were singing their song. Isn't that amazing? See, building Firefinch didn't just make us developers of a birding app. It really inspired our curiosity. And we really hope that this talk has done the same for you. And bonus points, if you're willing to download the app using this QR code, or just go to www.firefinchapp.co.za. We are running a promotion at the moment with a discount price. Yeah, and if they
are very informative and always a pleasure to have people that are passionate about something present a product that they've been involved in working up from zero. While we wait on our audience, perhaps pose a few questions in the chat side of things. If I may, I'll throw a couple of the generic questions in and see if that perhaps answers some of the folks' questions as well. Just to begin with, clearly you've both enjoyed it and had a great time in terms of producing the Firefinch app. But I'll ask a strange question anyway. Knowing what you know now, would you still go into this and go, let me actually undertake this journey, all these additional calls, all the hours, all the Git repo re-engineering, would you do it again?
Well, I'm glad you asked us and not our wives. Because our promise to our wives was that, like, give us 1 year, we will get this thing out. And with the redrawing of all the assets and some of the issues, it took us 3.5 years to just get it live the first time. So, but yeah, definitely, I like from my side.
No, I think the learnings was priceless. Like that's why I mentioned in the talk about sustainability. Like you wanted to set that up so you can really enjoy the journey, because there's so many golden nuggets. It's not just the end of where, like 5 years down the line, you've got 1,000 or 100,000 downloads. It's about this experience that's so enjoyable. Like it's not just building an app; it's a hobby. We also said, like, it was life changing. You know, in a big sense, like our family dynamics change. You know, when we go out, we don't go out for walks. We go out walking and looking for birds. We go to parks now. And I think it should be like it. You know, if you're doing something, and that's why it's so exciting building this in this problem space. It's healthy. It's a mental healthy problem space. So definitely, yes.
And also from the beginning, we, as Ebbie mentioned, we've had a failed startup attempt before, which cost us a lot of money. But even that we really enjoyed, and we also enjoy working together. We're brothers. We love spending time together, but also our skill sets fit very well. And finding people like Fancy and Anton then to make that picture even better. That's really energizing for me to be able to work in a small, dedicated team with really like those experts, understanding, and everybody. Like one of our team members recently said, "Hi guys, I'm sorry, like life is happening. I'm struggling to get to, you know, these things after hours, blah, blah." And I said to Ebbie, "I'm so glad he's also struggling." Because, you know, we can't put our day jobs second, because that's what Ebbie is saying. It has to be sustainable. You can't, like, I know there's quite a big thing. I'm also head of engineering at another company, quite aware of you know, the remote world with people trying to do 2 jobs at the same time. That's not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable. If you don't find a sustainable way to do this, then I would say you're definitely going to burn out or like burn bridges. But if you find a sustainable way, and I think for different people that sustainability might look different, but for us, that finances, relationships, and that motivation, personal drive, those were the 3 most important things.
Yeah, just to add like a small thing as well. I think when I mentioned like it's liberating you to practice your craft. Like I could explore my UX craft. You know, we usually have time constraints and budget constraints inside your corporate. The world is open to do whatever you want. So if you read one trend about UX or practice or process, then you go do it, because that's what you do, and you gain that experience. And what's really cool is that you bring that back into your corporate world and you say with confidence, say, hey, let's do this thing, and this is how you do it, and this is kind of the outcome that you do. So like a practical course, but with some extra benefits. Yeah.
I think one of the observations in terms of what you spoke about was you seem to have a bit of the dream team combination for an app build. You've got the tech specialist, you've got the UX specialist on the design side, you've got a domain specialist in Fancy, and you have the financing come into it as well. From that team structure and that combination of things, was there anything that you thought was missing or that would have made it a little bit easier?
Marketing. But I must say that from the beginning, when we started our DevConf, Karen has done a lot for us. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, like we a few months ago when we started the marketing thing, we just realized like we're clueless when it comes to marketing. We wished we had shares to give away, but after putting 4 years into this, not going to give away a single one. So we're going to struggle on as we are. But we've got friends that's also helping quite a lot. We're learning, but it's definitely an area that none of us had any expertise in.
And I'm interested just to go back to how you decided that this was the app that you were going to build. Where was the connection that got you into the birding community? Because so often folks come along with an idea in terms of an app that they're going to build, and very often that's the Uber of something, right? In this case, it's very far away from that. It's domain specific, it's community specific, and that's often a critical success factor for building a mobile application. There needs to be a community that you're going to serve. And then per what Ebbie was going through on the UX side, you need to be offering something of value that solves a need or drives a process or does something that community wants. So I'm just interested in connecting a couple of those dots and going, new birders in terms of the two gentlemen I'm looking at. How on earth did you get connected with this?
Yeah. So I officially we say this journey has been 4 years, but it's been much longer because Anton has sat with this idea. He loves the work of Fancy, but he realized like someone like Fancy to make a living, it's really hard because you only sell so many books, right? And so many books in a small area like South Africa. So he was trying to figure out how can he help Fancy to also get a perpetual income because he's a birder and Fancy is a birder, so they know each other. And then we became friends, and he gave it about 2 years, just seeing if I'm the right person to have the talk to. And then when he came very prepared with stats about how many birders there are in South Africa, that it's really a business idea that can be feasible and be sustainable. And I was like, really? Like birding? And when he started speaking, and that cruise, like there's people that would spend 15,000 rand on a trip to nowhere to look at birds. A whole ship, like 2,000 people willing to take out that kind of money. There has to be something. So Anton sold it to me. Ebbie was on board because I'm on board. And yeah, then we just had to get Fancy on board.
But I mean, just on the beginning of the story as well, even though, it was an idea, we said, yeah, ideas are great, but execution is everything. And you also need to understand, is there a market fit? So hence, even though we end up launching with the same stuff they proposed, I needed to be convinced. And that personal drive is part of it. You need to see people excited about something. You need some, at least, attachment to, okay, well, there is a fit. I think there was a specific stat that we got that we realized, okay, this is worth it. And then we said, let's just go with it. But it's always also interesting, this birding community is generally, you don't hear about birders. It's like a thing they keep to themselves. But as soon as they know, oh, you're building birds, I know a guy who's a big birder. It's like everyone knows a birder. So it's a well-connected community, but a shy one. Like it's not something you push out there. So it's actually a big thing, and it's really cool going in deep into this, looking at these people and their behaviors and so on. But yeah, that's probably part of the why we ended up why we yeah.
Fantastic story. In terms of the learning along the way, what were perhaps the things that you go, well, that was an expensive mistake or a time-consuming part of what went perhaps wrong in the process? Ultimately, you got there, but what would be the things that you would go, wow, watch out for those? Those are the real holes that you fall into and that you perhaps can avoid.
I would. I think our startup was quite expensive. So if we had to do that, I mean, our startup was kind of where we ended up. We had some knowledge about doing this thing, and that is also why it was like the learning from that we said it needs to be sustainable. So we don't go doing this again, saying we are go like 4 years. The original plan was 1 year, but 4 years is quite if you think about some guy who's he handles finances in years. Okay, this 1 year project turned out to be a 4 year project. They're gonna have a flip. It's a massive. So we almost planned these type of things to be okay. It's okay for this thing even to fail. It's okay for this thing to succeed, whatever it takes. That's one thing. Maybe you've got some more stuff.
Yeah, maybe just on the technological side. Yeah, so it's very true what Ebbie's saying. Like, I think many of the expensive mistakes we've made in the past, we had an opportunity to fix them here. And so one of the things so we've re-architected the app also, like, I think twice on both platforms. And the Android has what they call a Jetpack architecture stack, which we pivoted to. That helped us a lot. So I wish we did that earlier because it's just more standardized. You can follow, best practices and so on. And also thinking of it like it's a 4-year process. So the tech that you start with, you will have to be able to sustain for 4 years. It's the general architecture decisions. So we, for example, didn't choose Flutter 4 years ago because I didn't know where this thing would go. If we chose Flutter and it dies down, like we won't have 4 years to fix that. So that's why we also chose to go native, and both of us have that experience before. Yeah. And so something I also wish we did earlier is buy our M1 Max earlier, because if you work in the evenings, if you save 20 minutes on a build, it's a lot. Yeah, so
time is precious. I guess in this whole process and coming out with a quality product, was that one of the things that perhaps led you to a later release in terms of, say, MVP 1, rather than kind of going, well, we want to get something out there? Very often folks talk about the agile approach and using Scrum as a methodology. Why? So we get to MVP 1, minimum viable product, here it is. But I wonder, in your case, with that drive towards a quality output, whether you weren't consciously going, MVP 1 is actually going to be delivered a lot later than a fast show it kind of thing, purely because of that focus on quality. Was that the case?
Definitely. So I'd say the MVPs are already out there, right? The other birding apps. So we know they sell, we know they're doing well. So we didn't need to test the water for the basic stuff. What we did do, though, is our MVP was on that ship, and that was like last year, January, right?
Yeah, last year,
January. So we committed to get a piece of the app done. So we only did the seabirds, for example. And then after that, when we felt like, okay, this is good to go, then we built the app to be able to handle the rest of the birds as well. But yes, so the decision for Fancy to redraw all the birds added 2 years to the initial deployment date. If you used the birds in the book, then we would have been having this conversation 2 years ago, but maybe not as successful.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, the MVP, you have to launch it with all the species. You can't have one missing, you know, agile, no agile. If someone goes in the field and they see something, it's not in the app, it's not in the app, and the app is useless. So you have that kind of problem as well. So you try agile as far as you can, but if the amount of species needs to be in there.
But how we so in terms of that's why I said we had to take a quality approach for the content. But in terms of the features, this is still on MVP. There's a lot of things that we want to add, but we go at that slowly.
So if you had a stowaway barbet on the cruise ship, you guys might have been in trouble, yeah?
Yes.
All right. In terms of now getting user feedback, how do you bring that into your process now in terms of feature extension enhancements or even bug correction in the app? How do you bring that back into what you're doing now?
Well, time permits, like there's things that we still need to finish up on our Android because we have this listing thing live on our iOS, but it's halfway through on Android. So we get a lot of feedback with emails. We have the feedback inside the app. We've got people just showing us. So, and the cruise ship experience really gave us a really long roadmap of where we want to go. Like that experience, the difficult world anthropological experience of really experiencing, be the end user of your product. It's you almost, I'm carrying my user now with me. Like, you know, you have that empathy and you have that experience. So all the emails and things that you get in, we you know, it just fits into our roadmap. So yeah, we get a lot of it's through that. But if there's weekends, then we spend time with, you know, some birders and observe them and see what's needed. But as for now, we have that, and we've got Crashlytics that, you know, gives us reporting about our app or our bugs and things. So that's automatically coming in. So yeah, a lot of these feedbacks is automated for now.
And as you also said, Carl, it is a community, and it's a quite tight-knit community. So people really want to see this thing succeed. So if we open up the door for feedback, we definitely get that, with lots of ideas. We have too many ideas to handle at the moment. So we're like, I'm trying just to, can we just get this Android listing feature done, please? Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Ebbie, Stephan, we have reached the end of our hour.